And we're live. So welcome back. I will continue in English. If you have questions, does one of you have Slack up? Can you see if there's any questions? Notify me, because thank you. And if you want to ask questions in Swedish, that's perfectly fine. Because I do speak Swedish. I'll get to that. This introduction to project management would be one of, I wouldn't say one of the most boring lectures that you've been sitting through, but it's hard to make this exciting. It's project management is not very exciting. We just have to sit through it. Tomorrow will be much more interesting. There will be kind of more new stuff. But I mean, that said, have you ever thought of when you wake up in the morning? A few years ago, I realized that the only reasonable reaction when one wakes up in the morning is wow, because it's all still here, right? It's all still here, and you're still here, and you've been given. This has nothing to do with project management, but but you've been given this non-upgradable, three-dimensional physical vehicle, right? You've been gifted with this body, right? Top of the line, like peak of the evolution, which where we always are, but we happen to be, our species happen to be kind of at the top of the ladder at the moment. It wasn't always like that. I mean, we had to eat the leftovers from the predators, initially. So I think we shouldn't forget that we've been given these three-dimensional vehicles to navigate this wondrous three-dimensional world where the graphics is blowing away any graphics that you have in any of the games you're playing. It's just unbelievable to be here. So try sometimes to take a step back and realize how lucky you are to be alive. And now some project management. So, agenda for today. I'll talk a little bit about who am I, because I think it might make you listen a little bit more if you have some idea of where I'm coming from. And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. What is a project? What is project management? What is a project life cycle? We're going to have one case study. We're going to talk about why project management is hard. It's very, very hard. The whole industry fails most of the time. Despite knowing that it's hard, we still fail. And we're going to talk about some modern methodologies. But today is mostly about traditional project management methodologies. So who am I? So I have a PhD in computer science in algorithms and data structures, so theoretical computer science. My PhD thesis doesn't contain a single line. I didn't produce a single line of code during my PhD studies. I designed algorithms and data structures, and then I proved something about these algorithms and data structures, that they actually did solve the problem, or how fast they were, etc., etc. So theoretical kind of work. So I did that in Lund, and then I met my now wife, who is American, and she was in Europe at the time, and she wanted to get back to the US. And so she went, and she said, okay, if you want to be with me, you have to figure out the way to get your ass over to the US. So I had never, it had never crossed my mind to go to the US, which is kind of, ideologically, I had difficulties with it because it's kind of, especially in New York, which was about, it was kind of the mecca of capitalism. And I was thinking, why would I even set foot there? Right? I mean, I had been there as a tourist, and it was great, but really? Because this just goes against so many of my ideas of what is important in life. But, you know, love trumps everything, I would say. Or to be crass about it, reproduction trumps everything. When it comes down to it, love is love is just a way to make sure that reproduction happens, and the purpose of that is for evolution to continue. Right? It's my opinion, and it's shared by many. But anyway, so I applied for some money, a research grant, and received it, and I could spend this money anywhere I wanted in the world. So I went to New York City. So I was a visiting professor at Columbia University in Manhattan for a couple of years, and then I ran out of money. I also got married in the process because I also ran out of a visa. So I ran out of a visa, I got married, and now I'm out of money, and now I need to decide what am I going to do. So and I was thinking, should I stay in academia? And this is, I don't know, really. And this is now, we're talking about 1995. Right? And so I'm thinking, you know what? This internet thing might be something. Because at that time, it's not clear at all what's going to happen with this internet thingy. Right? And then I had the foresight to realize that it's the commercial possibilities on the net are so fantastic, so that the interesting development is not going to happen in academia. It's going to happen in industry because the incentives are there. Right? So I decided to try to leave academia, something that I had never considered before. So then, being a theoretician, what am I going to do? Who's going to hire a theoretician? Right? How can I help them at all? So I realized that, you know, my resume, my CV has nothing that is any employer is interested in. So I need to learn something. Right? So I decided to learn Java, which was in alpha. Java was in alpha spring of 1995. There was one book. It was called Hooked on Java, written by 3 guys from Sun Microsystems, where Java came out of. Right? And each page in the book was a description of an applet, because that was the initial idea with Java. You know, write once, run everywhere. Right? So it was these applets. And this was a description of the applet, and then there was a link to the applet. So I decided, okay, I'm going to learn Java, and then I'm going to sell myself as a Java programmer. I did so, and there were no Java programmers out there, so there was really nobody who could interview me and realize that, you know, my knowledge of Java was pretty shallow, really. But so on the surface, I looked great. So I managed to get a foot in the door in one company, and that's all it takes, right? You just need to get in. Once in, you tend to do different things than what they interviewed you for. So I did actually some coding for like 6 months or something like that. Then I started to do more design and stuff. And then my career took off. So this is now 96 in the internet industry in New York City. I never applied for a job after my first job. After that, you just headhunted from one place to another. I spent 14 years in this industry. I started a couple of companies. I was the chief technology officer for several startups. I was at a company called DoubleClick in the late 90s, and then I went back to DoubleClick a few years later. Does anybody know what DoubleClick is? DoubleClick was our CEO at the time said that we keep the web free. DoubleClick is the biggest advertising technology, was the biggest advertising technology company at the time. And I was there in 2007 when we started to see signs that Google is trying to break into that space. Google at the time was only AdSense, so contextual advertising, and paid search, AdWords, right? Those were the only things they did. They didn't do display advertising, the regular banner display. They didn't do that at all. And as a matter of fact, they didn't know how to do it. And not because they didn't know how to technically do it. We saw that they were out there trying it from a technical perspective. But then kind of the bomb dropped. We were up for sale. DoubleClick was up for sale, and we had 3 suitors: DoubleClick, Microsoft, and Yahoo were looking to buy DoubleClick. Bidding started at $2.1 billion and ended at $3.1 billion about 3 or 4 months later. So we were acquired by Google. And really, the reason they bought us was not for, as I alluded to, the technology, but we had big customers. And they didn't know how to handle big customers. Google in the beginning was all about the long tail, all the mom and pop shops, self-service, everything. They didn't know how to service Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola. They had no idea how to deal with those kind of business relationships. But we had done that since the inception of DoubleClick in 1995. So we were acquired by Google, and I was at Google for a couple of years, and then I moved from Brooklyn to Växjö. And a lot of people, when they hear that, kind of scratch their heads. You know, wow, yeah, wow. Yeah. What was he thinking? And here's the thinking. At the time I had been in New York for 16 years. I was kind of tired of New York. It's the tempo is high. It's a cutthroat kind of environment. And so we had already decided, me and my wife had already decided to leave New York. We didn't really know where to go, though. We were thinking about Northern California or Buenos Aires. Those were the two places. Then my father fell ill in cancer, so kind of started to point towards Sweden. And also, I had gotten a daughter, speaking of reproduction, during this time. So she was 4 years old at the time, 2009. And I kind of would prefer for her to have a Swedish childhood, because I think growing up with the Swedish values is not a bad thing. I rather wanted for her to learn how to skate than how to use the subway pass. Right? Life in New York for a kid is odd by small town Swedish standards, kind of. So we decided to leave New York and move to Sweden. I knew that one day my daughter would ask me, "Daddy, why did we move from Brooklyn to Växjö?" And I'm going to say, "Well, honey, you know, it was for your sake." And she's going to say, "What the fuck were you thinking?" And that day has arrived. She's now 12, and that's exactly what she's saying. So now she's saying, "Okay, Farfar is dead, Farmor has died in the process, and I've had a Swedish childhood. So it's time to move on." And that's what I'm going to do. So this is my, I'm planning for this to be my last year here. Then I'm off, don't know where to. Might be Californian, or maybe Berlin, or I don't know yet. I don't know. Don't know where to, I don't know what I'm going to do. But it's time for a new life. That's all I know. Circumstances have changed. So at DoubleClick, I was responsible for a team of over 150 developers, architects, designers, testers, 5 different geographic locations, 4 different time zones. And there I actually was responsible for implementing what we call an agile project management methodology across the entire organization. So what I'm going to talk about in particular in the lectures tomorrow, I've actually done it. Right? So this is not, doesn't come from I didn't read a book. Well, I'd read a book too about it, but I've actually done it. So there might be a reason for you to pay some attention to what I have to say. Then I left academia for a while. I started a company, but that turned to shit. And so I went back to academia, and yeah, who knows what's happening next. That was the fun part of this presentation. It's always fun to talk about yourself, isn't it? You have a captive audience. Can say whatever I want, and you know, it would be rude of you to walk away. So I'll take advantage of that. Okay, so what is a project? So a project is something temporary, and it has a particular benefit in mind. It's supposed to produce some form of product or service or something. And so it has requirements. It has some form of scope, a project. It has a time frame. So this is the most important one, really. So it's not business as usual. Projects is something different. It requires resources. Somebody needs to own it. It has a budget. And somebody is sponsoring it from the top. Because if nobody is sponsoring it from the top, and you guys are doing something down here, somebody at the top is going to start to ask the question, well, you know, yeah, we have plenty of people to do something. Why don't we just grab this bunch of people here? Because there's nobody who tells us not to. Right? So an executive sponsor, somebody high up, is critical for a project to work. Project management, then, is the discipline of achieving the project goals while adhering to the constraints. Right? So somebody is managing this effort, this temporary effort. And this means that you need to establish clear goals. Project management involves the planning and organization of resources, balancing demands, communication about the project, because people are going to want to know, especially your executive sponsor is going to want to know what's going on in this project. Because somebody else is going to ask him or her that, you know, I need resources, you know, do you have some resources available? So you need to know, the executive sponsor needs to know that you're actually doing something that is useful and is satisfying his or her desires. And the biggest challenges when it comes to projects, to project management, tends to be human beings, right? And soon we'll get away with, get rid of those, right? I mean, it won't be too long before the need for human beings in the production machine is eliminated. I mean, for most activities, we're talking within 20 years, they're going to be gone. We're not going to have jobs anymore. That's a big problem. That's not really on the political agenda. The lack of work in the future. What are people going to do? And how? I mean, if you don't have a job, if you don't have income, then you cannot consume. Right? So it's not really in the interest of the owners of the production machine to replace humans with robots to do everything, because what's being produced in the end needs to have some buyers. Otherwise, there's no point producing it. So you need to make sure that you have people with dispensable income who can actually buy the products and services that are being produced, even if they're produced in an automated way. So this actually speaks to some form of universal salary, which is being tried in some countries. In Finland, they're trying it. In Switzerland, they just voted it down. But it's coming up on the agenda in many nations, actually. Yeah. Oh yeah, I have it this way. So let's see. So a project is typically initiated by product management. Product. I'm going to talk about product and services, and product includes service. In English, typically it does. When you talk about products in Swedish, you say produkter or tjänster. They tend to separate them. Anyway, so product management includes services. So it's their job to know what the customers, what the market needs. Right? There could also be internal projects, obviously. I mean, in engineering, for example, you might some developers might realize that, you know, if we change things around, they reorganize or re-architect this part of the system, you know, efficiencies will be gained from that. So the instigators might be in engineering, but that's typically mostly for kind of cost cutting. When it comes to revenue generation, it's product management. It's their job to do that. So this is how a typical project, what a typical project life cycle looks like. Some form of initiation, and we're going to go through these in excruciating detail. Some form of initiation, then some planning, and then you start to actually do things, and then you complete things. So initiation, here you ask the question, why? What's the business value? If there's no business value, you won't be allowed to carry out the project. Nobody's going to sanction this kind of project. You need to confirm who's sponsoring this and who's funding it in the organization. Document scope and assumption. Engage stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? Well, it could be executives, end users, customers, suppliers, etc., whoever is affected by this. Draft some high-level plan and figure out what do we need, who needs to provide services in order to carry this shit out. Maybe I should watch my language since this is being recorded. I never think of that, you know, because it's not being edited afterwards. Damn. Okay, so after initiation, there's some form of planning going on. So we'll go through examples of these different phases. We dive into greater detail of the requirements, figure out how is this going to be done, who is going to do it, when is it going to happen, how much is it allowed to cost, what are the risks associated with this project, and some form of communication plan, because as I said, communication around a project is crucial. Okay, so now you have a plan. Now you just execute that plan. And while you execute, you communicate to the outside world, to the stakeholders, what's going on. You monitor your progress. You monitor risks. It could be new risks. It could be risks that are eliminated. There's going to be changes. There's always changes, and we'll get to that later, because human beings tend to be involved and they change their minds. And on top of that, you know, after you start the project, the rest of the world doesn't grind to a standstill and wait for you to finish your project. The competitive landscape might change significantly from the time we initiate the project till you actually finish the project, which should cause changes in your project, because you don't want to build something that is not going to generate any value in the end. And after execution, you complete the project, the completion phase, to some form of review with the stakeholders to make sure that they give an okay. Some form of handover plan, because typically it's not the same people who actually build something who are responsible for maintaining it afterwards. Typically you have like the best people at building it, and then you have more junior people to actually maintain it afterwards. It's also a great way for them to learn things. And then some form of retrospective, because there's always things that went wrong or things that went unusually well, and it's good to kind of document that, remember that for future projects. And then you can even think of, if this is the project life cycle, inside of execution and control, you kind of have, traditionally, you have a software development life cycle, with planning, analysis, design, implementation, and testing, and maintenance and support. This is the traditional way of doing things. This is not how we're going to do things. And sometimes I feel like to introduce these agile methodologies I'm kind of missing the point, because you guys haven't been exposed to how it used to be. Right, soon we're going to stop telling you how it used to be and only tell us this is how we do it. But the contrast is enormous, and I've experienced this contrast, which I will get back to that, I think, towards the end, or maybe tomorrow or something. And this is something to always keep in mind, the trade-off triangle. So you have, assuming that we fix quality of your product, it has a scope, it has a cost, and it has a schedule. Now, if you change one of these, you need to change at least one more, right? If you want to lower the cost, well, either it's going to take longer or you're going to build less. If you're going to increase the scope, well, either it's going to take you longer or it's going to cost you more. You need more resources for it. If you want to do it faster, you either need to reduce the scope and or increase the cost of what you're doing. So, an example. So, this actually came from a kind of a personally experienced pain. So, you know, when you search, this is kind of an old Google search results screen, but so Sergey Brin, one of the founders of Google, he has this idea that was really my idea, but you know, I would like to give him some credit. So he would like for you, you know, when you search, you get a list of results, and then what I typically do when I see this list of results, so you see the titles and some snippets from these pages, right? What I typically do is I kind of scan through these, and if there's something that looks kind of relevant, I open it up in a new tab. And then I might even go to the next search results page and open maybe a few more up in tabs. So I don't dive into one of the search results right away, because I know there might be something further down that might be more relevant for me. But this one seems relevant, so I open it up in a new tab. This one not, this one not, this I can open it in a new tab. And then I revisit those tabs when I'm done kind of with the search itself. So there I am with a lot of tabs related to this one search that I did. And then I might make another search and I get another bunch of tabs. And so how do I keep track of these? And in particular, in this kind of scenario, I'm interested in learning something about some topic, right? I'm not, because Google seems to be designed for the use case where you have a question, you interact with the search engine, and when the interaction is finished, you have the answer to your question. So I call that kind of hit and run kind of search, right? That's what Google is designed to do. Google is not designed for knowledge acquisition. If you start to ask people where they store their links of interest that they find, well, there's very few who use favorites or whatever they're called, depending on the browser, simply because the interface for managing those just sucks. Right? It's just not good enough. So some people I talk to, yeah, they store it in Word documents. I mean, really? Right? So the idea here is that Sergey has is that he would like to be able to set aside search results to access them later, because I don't want to do it now. I don't have time to dive into each one of those search results that looks promising right now. I don't have time for that right now. I'll do that later. So we're going to go through this as a project. So initiation. So what's the business value? Well, users want this, and if you give them what they want, we make more money on ads. You know what? That's not far from the truth of the mentality at Google. I heard, this is a story, of when Google were building Google Checkout. I don't know if it exists anymore. Google Checkout was a direct competitor to PayPal. Same thing as PayPal. Right? And the product manager, when they demonstrated this to the Google executives, proudly said, okay, and with this site, this commerce site, we have an exclusive. So there's no PayPal alternative here. There's only Google Checkout. And the Google executives said, that's not good. I said, what do you mean? Well, that's not good, because we would like for the users to have as many possibilities as possible. So there is a little bit of altruism in Google, actually. Right? I mean, I don't know how much of it is left, but there is a little bit. Executive sponsor is Sergey Brin himself. Scope allow users to set aside search results to revisit at a later time. Stakeholders is Sergey, end users, well, most folks. And we need some software engineers, some QA folks, some designers, usability folks, and translators, because this needs to be rolled out to 74 markets at the same time, or whatever they have now. Okay, initiation, planning. Okay, so what is this going to be like? Well, a button next to each search result allows the user to add that result to a basket of search results. And the basket itself should support some view all, deletion of individual items, and emptying of all the items. Right? Simplistic, but I think you kind of get the point. I mean, here, for example, I would like to know, say that I have found a number of articles on some topic. Right? I would like to be able to tell Google, okay, these four articles, find me similar stuff. To all 4 of them. Can't do that today, I think. Similar results, I think, existed sometimes. I don't know if they have it today, but had existed. Okay, there's a schedule, there's a start date and a finish date. Milestones, October 1st. Okay, so this is a week. After a week, we should have the buttons on the search results page. A couple of weeks later, we should have the basket functionality complete. 2 weeks later, usability testing should be complete. A couple of weeks after that, translation should be complete, and then integration testing, performance testing, and then we demo to stakeholders first of December. So how are we going to do this? Well, the search engineering team will add the buttons to the results page. A team from the checkout folks will implement the basket functionality. The budget is 30 full-time employee months. Risks, well, the checkout team current project might run late. We don't know who's going to do translation. We need to identify that, so that's a risk. How are we going to communicate? We're going to have weekly status report to Sergey and the search product management. And then we start execution. And so we identify tasks and deliverables, and we produce this kind of a Gantt chart, which you've probably seen at some point. Interestingly, I heard that Microsoft Project was developed using agile methodologies. So a project management tool that is a management tool for traditional processes used agile methodologies to actually develop it. And here you can track dependencies and progress. And then eventually you demo the feature to Sergey. He identifies maintenance and support folks, and you deploy the feature to end users. So that's, how a typical project works. And here's a case study. So this is John's web agency. So John, this is a little place. He only has 6 employees. And so we have a couple of customer support. They tend to be females. Ebba and Malin. We have a couple of developers, Vlad and Fred. We have UI design and test, also tend to be female. And then we have a DBA operations guy, always male. Always. You know. And so John, I mean, you can tell, right? He likes money, this guy. So he's always looking for new opportunities. And when returning from lunch one day, he has a fabulous idea. What? Okay, yeah. So when this is from Växjö now. So when John goes for lunch, he regularly has he visits like 5 different restaurants, right? And which one he goes to depends on what they're serving that day. So how does he find out? How does he make his decision as to where to go have lunch? Well, he could check the restaurant's websites before heading out for lunch. But you know, you don't want to visit 5 different websites, and it could also be out of date, the information you have there. And he would like to have access to this in one place. The local paper has this information if you tear out that page of the paper on Mondays, but he's not going to carry that with him. He wants to have access to it from his mobile device, obviously. Right? So can we build him a service that provides him with this convenience? So we're going to go through that, do through these phases with the yeah, let's do it. Go through these phases for this project. So, assumptions here. The restaurant should be able to enter the daily special through some web-based UI. Customers should be able to select which restaurants they want to get information from so that they don't get more than they want. And this should also be through some web UI, and they probably want to do it from a mobile device as well, so it needs to be responsive. And every Monday morning an email gets sent out to customers informing them of the offerings of the restaurants that they have selected. John has already spoken to some restaurants and they're very interested. And we would like for the restaurants, they should be able to they shouldn't need to authenticate to the system, but customers ideally shouldn't have to authenticate. Can we avoid that? Can we avoid end users creating yet another account somewhere? Business value? Well, we can charge restaurant a fee for including their offerings. Or really what we're doing, we are creating a one-to-one marketing channels from the restaurants to the customers, and who knows what we can use this for in the future. So that's another business value. And sometimes nowadays, kind of business values are not so obvious. It used to be the case that you needed to be able to estimate revenue based on some activities. But nowadays, I mean, for example, collecting data, right? Collecting data and aggregating data across an organization. It's not so obvious right now what the revenue is going to be from such an activity, but we know that it's important to know your customers, so eventually we'll be able to use that somehow. Sponsoring and funding, John is sponsoring, and there's almost no projects going on, so almost the whole team is available to work on this. Engage stakeholders. We're still in the initiation phase here. John is already engaged. We need to identify individuals at restaurants and a few end customers. So a high-level plan is pitch to all downtown restaurants, gather requirements from end users, build a web UI for restaurants, web UI for customers, and then build some form of list management and email execution engine to actually send these things out. Planning. So for restaurants, here we go down one level of detail. For restaurants, we want the web UI authentication required, and restaurants should be able to sign up a customer email address. Customers, no authentication, they should be able to make and update selections, and they should be able to unsubscribe from the whole thing. Internally, we have the email sending, list management. Open questions, how do we avoid authentication for end users? Don't really know that yet. Can the restaurant see who's selecting them? Don't really know, have no answer to that yet. Bounce and open rates, you know what that is for emails? I mean, if I'm a business sending out emails, I would like to know how many actually received it, right? So that's kind of the 1 minus the bounce rate. And I would like to know how many actually opened the email. Right. How are we going to do this? Well, we're going to use PHP and MySQL, since that's what we know in this company. And the existing hardware infrastructure is going to be fine, because this is not a high traffic kind of application. The web UI for restaurants, we use SSL, simple authentication, some password policy, and then we have a database of offers hooked up to the web UI. Database selection for the customers, unsubscription functionality, and again, email sending and list management. Budget, 11 person months. Don't ask how I got to that. Staffing, well, we have all of Vlad and half of Fred, because he needs to maintain something. Emma is available as a designer tester. Tom is available, 50%. Malin is available. Is that her? Her? Forgot. Is that wrong? And John is an act project manager for this project. We're going to start October 1st, and we're going to end January 1st. Okay, so now we're getting down to more details regarding timing here. So after 1 week, we should have gathered the requirements from end users. We're going to have a database schema ready. A week later, we should have the UI design done. 2 weeks after that, do the restaurant web UI first, and then the customer web UI. And a week after that, we should be able to send emails. A couple of weeks after that, all security aspects should be functional. Functional testing, performance testing, make it available to friends and family, and make it available to everybody. And the risk here, can we be viewed as spammers and end up in the bulk mail folder? You know why one ends up in the bulk mail folder or the junk mail? I mean, it used to be, it might still be to some extent, it used to be based on the content of the email, right? Because they simply analyze the content of the syntactic analysis of the content of the email. Nowadays, I don't think they do that very much. And because one realization is that what's junk for one is gold for another, right? So what they're starting to do more and more is to determine whether something is junk or not is, do they open it? If you never open it, the system is going to start to think more and more that this is junk. If you open it, even if for some other user it's junk, then for you it's not junk. Right? For one thing, we need to be white labeled. We need to, the email service providers such as Gmail, for example, they don't, if you try to send an email to a few thousand Gmail users, Gmail, in this case Google, is going to look at, who are you? Because, and they're going to see, last time you sent, it all ended up in junk folders. So no, we're not letting you in, right? Because it's in their interest really to provide a good user experience for their customers, who are the users, the mail account owners here. So it's important that you actually make sure that you get whitelisted, meaning that you get an open door from the email service providers, especially if you're going to send a lot of emails. Okay, so now we start. Oh, so here's more planning. Okay, so this is a poor man's version of a kind of Gantt chart. So here we have all the things that need to be done, and we have start date and end dates on them, and we have resources associated with them. So then we start. So a week has gone in the project. Well, this is not a big surprise. John is too busy, right? The boss is always too busy, always. And since he hasn't gathered, he's only 50% done gathering requirements, Emma has not been able really to start she only started the design, and she was supposed to be expected to be further along by now, but she started design both for the restaurant UI and the customer UI. Tom, though, he kind of went ahead and developed the database schema anyway, because he kind of knows what it's going to be, so he might modify it later on. Tom is always on the ball, you know. He looks it, doesn't he? He gets stuff done. A week later, John actually finished the requirements gathering, but he was 5 days late. And Emma managed to finalize the design of restaurant UI. She's not completely done with the customer UI, simply because the requirements were too late. And Vlad and/or Fred have actually started implementation of the restaurant UI. Now we jump 2 weeks forward. End of October. Now the restaurant UI is actually complete. Design is not complete of the customer UI, but implementations has started anyway. A month further into the process, Vlad has been sick for a week. Right? He probably had his kids in school or something. You know, that's how most grown-ups seem to get sick these days. So he is not done. He's only half done with the unsubscription piece. He's not done. He hasn't even started with the security aspects for customers. We move 2 weeks ahead. And guess what? Vlad passed it to Fred. Right, so now Fred has been sick for a week. Vlad is behind. The customer UI is not ready to test. And the restaurant UI has not even started to be tested. And so at this point, they realize that we cannot launch even to friends and family on December 22nd, but we're going to delay it until January 15th. 7th of January, everything is done except the restaurant UI is really sluggish. So it requires some database optimization. We need Tom for that. So we delay the launch an additional week. I'm almost done here. So finally, the 15th of January, they demoed the service to John. They develop a handover plan. And we also realized that we need to monitor resource usage on the production environment. And we also realized that we need to produce some internal reports because we would like to know if anybody is signing up. Right? So we need some reports of whether this service is working or not from a functional perspective. And so the delay cost 4 person months above budget. And finally, lessons learned. Don't rely on only John for requirements. Build in some buffer because, especially at that time of the year, you know, October, November, December, people get sick. Also, the security aspects problems with security aspects suggest that we should attack the riskiest tasks earlier in the project. And we only have 5 restaurants, right? We need more restaurants. Next time we need to secure more clients earlier on. So with that, we're going to take a 10-minute break. And we're back. So John's project didn't go that well, but in the big scheme of things, it went pretty well, actually. Because this is the bad news. And this is really mind-boggling. So the average IT project costs twice as much as budgeted, takes twice as long as planned, has 65% of required functionality at completion. And the interesting thing here is that this happens despite us knowing this, right? It's one thing if everybody thought, if this is going to go according to plan, but we know, going into it, we know this is not going to go according to plan. Still, this happens. And one could think that, okay, but here's one way of doing it to avoid this. Why don't we budget twice as much as we think it's going to cost? Budget for twice as much time as we think it's going to cost, and reduce the functionality to about 65% of the initial functionality they want. Well, you could do that, then you have a way better chance of actually hitting the target then. But the thing is that if you do that, you're not going to be allowed to start the project. Because if you say this is going to cost this much, nobody will sponsor it. So you're kind of caught. Right? 62% failed to meet schedule, 50% have higher than expected maintenance costs, and 41% they don't even deliver business value. So this is a disaster. Like industry-wide, this is a disaster. I'm not talking about the IT industry, because these days, I mean, which companies are not IT companies these days? I mean, I would say banks, primarily IT companies. The whole media industry, primarily IT companies. Just sector after sector is becoming primarily IT in a way. If you look at what are the employees doing. So why do they fail? So this is based on a survey done a few years ago among a large number of corporations. Top reason for failure, in their opinion, is incomplete requirements. Lack of user involvement, so this is in order of importance for failure, important factors of failure. Lack of resources, lack of executive support, changing requirements, unrealistic schedule, poor communication. And then they asked the same companies, what are the factors for success? User involvement, executive support, clear business objectives, adjusted scope, agile processes, which is what we're going to talk about the rest of this course, and poor project management expertise. Oftentimes you get project managers who are kind of paper pushers, right? They're just there to, it's like in Swedish, it's like ordningsmän, right? By the way, when you choose your scrum masters, don't choose those who used to sit in the back of the classroom, but choose those who are good ordningsmän. Somebody who wants to who likes keeping track of things. So here we have the traditional project life cycle again. So the problem with this one is that they assume a predictable world. They assume that clear requirements, that the requirements are clear and that they're known from the beginning. They assume that the competitive landscape doesn't change while we pursue this project. That the stakeholders don't change their minds. Well, they are humans too, you know. So they do change their minds. And that the availability of resources doesn't change. We assume that there's no other important project that's going to be started that's going to pull resources from our project. And this might work fine sometimes. I haven't seen it work though. So the traditional methodologies, which is what we saw before in the first part of the lecture. So iterative methodologies. Here, the motivation is that requirements do change after the project starts. And the world around us changes. So let's embrace this change. It's inevitable. It's the only thing that's inevitable in life in general is change. That's the only constant in life is change. There was this story about this Asian emperor thousands of years ago, I guess, so he had it all, right? He was living the life. He had it all, yet he wasn't happy. So he sent for the wisest person in his kingdom and asked this person, so what's wrong here? Can you help me? How come I'm not happy when I have everything? And the guy walked away and came back, and he handed over a ring to the emperor and asked the emperor said to the emperor that you know, whenever you feel really happy or if you feel really down, look inside of the ring. And inside of the ring, it was inscribed, "This too will pass." So no matter how good it is, no matter how bad it is, that we know, it will pass. So do not get attached to how good things are right now or how miserable things are right now. Because misery is also kind of very addictive. You kind of just bob around in this misery because at least you know it, right? Because the worst thing for most human beings is this uncertainty of the unknown. So no more philosophy now. So iterative methodologies, they assume that change will happen. Traditional methodologies, they're trying to minimize the impact that change has. Right? So can we create a process which assumes that change will happen instead of a process where we don't want any change to happen, because if change happens, that means that there is more work. And in iterative, you go through the normal kind of loop and you keep iterating on something that you're building until you're satisfied with it. Right? You do it, you plan and you build your thing, and then you test it, and if it's not good enough, you plan again and modify it, and you keep doing that until you have something that's good enough, that satisfies the stakeholders. And here's an example. So Leonardo was asked to paint Mona Lisa. So he makes a sketch to the client and asks, will this work? And the client says, no, she must be turned left. It's a good thing he didn't finish, right? Because that would have been wasted work if he had actually added color to this. So he makes that change, make her right. And he adds some color to it as well. Right? So yeah, how about this? Well, her head is too big. Again, it's a good thing he didn't finish it. So he makes the change. Now, is this better? Well, I prefer bigger eyes, but for the price I pay, it's okay. Right? So got some requirements, build something, show it. Is this good enough? No, not good enough. Modify it. Try again. Is this good enough? Not good enough. More input. Modify it. And eventually we get to what's something that's satisfactory to the client. So that's iterative. You iterate until you get a good enough. The other important methodology is incremental. And this is also motivated by that requirements do change, but also that partial functionality is valuable. And especially in today's age, when a lot of services are delivered as sort of cloud-based services, for example, when it's no longer shrink-wrap software, you can actually provide a customer with partial functionality. I mean, if you think about Microsoft Word, for example, I think what is it like? I forgot the statistics now, but at least 90% of the functionality in Microsoft Word is almost never used, right? So if you were to build, if you were foolish enough to build a word processor today, clearly you would start by building what people are using. And you could actually ship that, and revenue could start coming in while you develop additional functionalities, additional features for this word processor. So here the idea, incrementally, the idea is, as it says in the world, incremental, that you break up the project into small chunks where each chunk has a business value. So you might have, so your project might consist of, say that each column in this cube is a piece of functionality, where the top layer here corresponds to the UI, and then you have middleware and you have a back end. And so here you have 3 by 4, 12 chunks of functionality, each requiring all the levels of the technology stack you're having. And so here you have one piece of functionality that's actually complete. You have some functionality where you only built the UI so far, so you probably have mock-ups of the middleware or the back end. And you have some pieces of functionality we haven't even started developing yet. And after a while, you have now completed a bunch of functionality, and there's some stuff that you still haven't started with. And eventually, you're done. Now, agile is incremental plus iterative. So you take a piece of functionality, you iterate until that's done, then you take another piece of functionality and you iterate until that's done, and you develop things in that way. So, yeah. And compared to traditional is the black lines here, black curves. In agile if you use an agile methodology, the visibility into your project is going to be much better because you're actually picking one chunk of functionality at a time. So you can actually show something so that people know what's going on in the project. In traditional, here you start the planning phase and nobody sees anything until you come out at the other end, typically. And so for somebody higher up to ask, how is it going? Well, in this scenario, it's really difficult to say how it's going. We don't know. Whereas here, you know how it's going all the time. So transparency is one of the side effects of, and actually objectives also of agile methodologies. Adaptability, meaning that can you change the requirements? Can you change what you're doing? Well, in traditional, essentially once you start the project, you can't change anything. In agile, after each iteration, you can actually change what you want to do. You generate business value earlier, and if you attack riskier tasks first, you actually have less risk. And so the Agile Manifesto. So this is it's a manifesto. It says that we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Value doesn't mean that processes and tools are inconsequential, but just says that this is more important than what this is. We value working software over comprehensive documentation. And this is good news to most developers, right? Because it means that you are not going to be asked to produce a lot of documentation. Doesn't mean that documentation has no value. But what we tend to document is stuff that needs to be documented, right? We don't produce documents describing stuff that we're going to do far into the future, because we don't know if we're really going to do it far into the future or not. Because the product owner, the one responsible for the product, might change his or her mind. So this stuff that you have designed we might not even try to do it. And so you could have used your time better. We value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So this is about the end user involvement, right? And so traditionally contracts are being negotiated, but we rather want, ideally you want a customer almost on your team. You want to meet the customer at least once a week. And not only the product folks, but also the actual doers, the developers should also meet with the clients and see how the clients react. And we value responding to change over following a plan. Again, this does not mean that you don't have a plan, right? Because, as I'm going to say tomorrow, failing to plan is planning to fail, right? You need a plan, but you cannot be too stubborn about your plan. You need to take into account empirical data. If something happens that messes up the plan I had, well, it's foolish to ignore that and continue with my plan. What I should do is take it into account and modify my plan accordingly. Right? This is just common sense, really. So to summarize this, we talked about the definition of a project, what project management is, the traditional project life cycle with initiation, planning, execution, and completion. We looked at this John's Web Agency as an example of traditional project life cycle. I mentioned iterative and incremental methods, and combining those two then leads to agile methodologies. And tomorrow is all about agile. We're going to start with agile in general and specifically Scrum, go through what kind of different roles exist in a Scrum environment, what ceremonies exist, meaning ceremonies means kind of meetings, and what artifacts are being produced in the process, because there still needs to be communication of requirements, somehow tracking. Agile planning, how do you plan? User stories and acceptance criteria. User stories is the way that we express requirements. You familiar with user stories at all? Yeah, you've seen that. Story points, have you seen that? No? Story points is a way to assess the effort involved in pulling off a user story and implementing a user story. So it's used for estimation. Team velocity, so what is the capacity of this team? And and then estimation. So these two combined allows us to make pretty good estimates. And that was all I was thinking of saying today. Any questions on this? No? Anything on Slack anywhere? It's just crystal clear, isn't it? Yeah, as I said, this is kind of a little bit boring. Tomorrow would be better because it's more new to you, I think, and it's also definitely, if you haven't paid a lot of attention today, tomorrow is the day to pay attention because that will actually benefit you in the rest of the course. All right. Thank you for your time, everybody. I will see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Thank you.